Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. In this episode, we finally get through the spiritual buffet issue, but of course there's much more to talk about around that. We talk about the necessity of paradigmatic constructive criticism, the judgment of judgment, the relationship a soul has with a paradigm, what happens in enlightenment related to conditioning in a world of conditions, how organized religion twists itself into pretzels to maintain popularity, but moreover, the damage a person does to themselves when they pick and choose elements from incompatible paradigms and attempt to live by them. I'll remind you to listen to these podcasts from the beginning and in order, please. Thanks so much for listening. So we're back, and we're going to finish, we think we're going to finish. We don't really know. We're going to continue. We know we're going to do that. We're going to continue the spiritual buffet, paradigmatic buffet issue, and Stacey, you wanted to talk about the level of intellectualism in the last couple episodes.
Yeah. Joseph, you and I have a lot of fun playing with frameworks. And those are mostly mental body frameworks. And if you've been a listener and followed the last few podcasts, you might get the idea here that identity is like completely head-centered.
Yeah.
And it's actually the exact opposite. And so the intellectualism that you might have been filling the space in the last few podcasts, I just want to remind listeners that identity is an emotive-based paradigm, not a mentalized-based paradigm. It has mental aspects to it that are quite profound and interesting and fun to talk about, as Joseph and I do. But I want to remind us that the representation of identity is emotive in its picture because it defines the base bandwidth of human consciousness is emotive, not willful, not mental, not physical, not even energetic. It's emotive. And if that is true, and so far after about 40 years of testing this paradigm and being tested by others also, that premise has held fast so far. But what that means is the basic teaching of identity is that our human consciousness is emotive in its core, in its essence, because the divinity within which we abide at all times and within us abides at all times is best described with the very strange word we call love. And the love dynamic of divinity suffuses every moment of existence in no matter what dimension or direction you go. And since love is an emotive, dynamical bandwidth, and best way we can describe love, we as children or whole-on offspring, however you want to say it, since we're constantly always inside of divinity, then we must also be made of love, or at our core essence. And that translates humanistically to emotivity being the primary bandwidth of our being, not mentality, not willfulness, and certainly not physicalness. So that even is deeper than energy. And we've talked about energy, the difference between energy and love before. We might talk about it again here soon. But I just wanted to remind listeners that not to be, when we play with frameworks and mentalized pictures, we can also get a little sardonic and pejorative. But that's not so much judgment as it is discernment. Discernment. And discernment can be fun. One last point about that is that, before we begin, is a discernment only becomes a judgment when you withdraw love from that which you just discerned. If you don't withdraw love from your discernment or your observation, it's not judgment. It's simply, oh, look at how these can coexist. Innocence on one side and confusion in the middle or downright dark on the outcome, that whole chain is within a picture of non-judgment. So when we, as we will today, I might probably find some pejorative bandwidth to talk about paradigm cherry pickers. Remember that it's all in the framework of discernment, not judgment and not superiority. Mm-hmm. And so please try to put an and between those two, even though we don't have many good role models for an and between biting, incisive discernment and judgment. We don't have many good examples that there can be an innocentness to that discernment and not a judgment.
Yeah, it's. I'm glad you brought this up, Stace, because it's a very tricky topic. Of we have that expression, light a candle rather than cursing the darkness, right. And it seems very clear that one needs to do both, because in the presentation of anything, much less a new paradigm like yours, if you don't compare and contrast, you fail to identify.
Yes.
This is an apple. It's not as tart as an orange. Well, you're running down oranges. No. I'm trying to describe an apple using something you already have an experience of. Well, Don't do that. Just tell me what the apple is like. Well, then I will do a worse job describing the apple.
Yes.
It's inevitable that you have to compare and contrast. Like, what's an 18-year-old like compared to a 12-year-old? Mm-hmm. You're going to end up running down the 12-year-old. Anytime you compare, it creates a hierarchy, and it's unavoidable. And so we do our best. And like we said before, it's hard sometimes not to chuckle at contradictions and it's just hard. But I don't know what I want to say about this. It's hard. It also, because of our cultural conditioning about judgment, that judgment is bad, which, as you've pointed out, is a judgment of judgment. So poof, there goes that.
Yes.
I was just listening to Adam Carolla this morning, who was talking about that, about how the lack of the judgment of judgment, he didn't put it that way, but that since judgment has become bad, everyone's on their worst behavior, and it's leading to narcissism and people wearing their pajamas at the airport and entitlement in kids. And that's where that has brought us.
Yes.
So the conditioning is, you're not supposed to say, it goes all the way back to some people's childhood conditioning. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. Well, where the hell did that come from? Martin Luther King, JFK, Yeshua the Nazarene, Muhammad, these people said bad things about what was going on. The Buddha, they weren't just pro something, they were against something also.
Yes.
So when people get itchy about, you're saying something against thing, I would say, well, so? Like, that's how change works. There has to be a yes and a no both.
Well, really well put. Thanks for that framework, because if I had a dollar growing up in the Catholic religion, every time the priest on the pulpit on Sunday condemned sexual casualness, or wearing latex on your lingam, or 9,000 other things.
It's in the Bible, right? You're not supposed to put latex there, I think. It's in the Bible.
Yeah, boy, it's amazing that they had awareness of how to synthesize latex at that time, isn't it?
Yeah.
So anyway, our conditioning, I've had this conversation probably 200, 300 times over the years, that especially when you bring out a new paradigm, you must compare and contrast, or there's nothing to say about it. If I start talking about it, you have no referent in your experience. And if we weren't malconditioned so badly, especially in this domain of divinity and humanity, and where they don't meet in our world, if you don't have that clarity, if that malconditioning wasn't there, you could talk more about the apple without contrasting it with the orange or the pineapple. But you can't when you were battling in this case, 5,000 years of spiritual guidance, about 3,000 years of philosophical guidance, and about 140 years of psychological guidance. Identity challenges all of those in almost every direction. And so we're dealing with literally about 5,000 years of conditioning in ways that have taken us farther away from our soul centers than toward it.
And that leads to, well, if we're okay describing apples in terms of oranges and describing the Matrix 3 versus the first Matrix movie and all of these comparisons, we're all okay with this plumber versus that plumber, this computer versus that computer. We're all okay. But when it comes to value systems or spiritualities or whatever, suddenly it's not okay. So then the question is why? Because you have to defend your value system because it's so weak and incoherent. That's the only reason.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to defend if you were actually sure of the sobriety of your paradigm. You would never feel criticized.
Yeah.
If when Ayn Rand, someone said she's going to the 7th level of hell for teaching there is no God. I saw this, and she said to the Christian apparently who accosted her with this, she said, "Well, you should be happy. You should be happy that I'm going to hell by your own worldview. I'm going to hell and I'm going to suffer for it. Why are you so angry with me? You should be dancing on the rooftop in glee. Or if you were really a follower of your particular prophet, why aren't you praying for me instead of mocking me
or compassionately trying to help or something?" Oh yeah. Right.
So, I mean, even Ayn Rand knew about malconditioning and judgment, and she was bringing an anti-original sin-based atheism that gave ego actually a space to exist, even as confused as she was about things. So,
and I just have to say, Ayn Rand has a horrible reputation in the world because she's so largely misunderstood and co-opted by greedy Republicans using it to justify their behavior. We're going to have to do a whole, I don't know.
Wait, but don't forget Christian Republicans.
Yes.
Who have kidnapped her message.
Yes.
Even though she's atheistic.
You're trying to combine, and maybe that's a segue into paradigmatic buffetism, because there's a great example of it. So it's like, help the poor altruistic Christianity combined with Ayn Rand selfistness, self-interestness. You put those together and you get someone who is very confused and treats people quite badly.
That's a great segue. So let's go in with that, since we've just been talking about paradigms. And one phrase I don't think I used in our definition of paradigms as we've been exploring what they are, Joseph, is the fact that paradigms, we talked about how necessary they were, but another way to say that is that paradigms are the digestive enzymes of our consciousness as we eat experience.
Wow, I never heard you say that. Cool.
Yeah,
digestive enzymes, the governing dynamic by which we digest reality.
Exactly right. Oh, that's even better. Save that for yourself there and own that one, bud. And it's important because every moment we are conscious, we're eating experience.
Yeah.
And without a paradigm or a worldview based on certain sets of assumptions and all sorts of value systems, and we're not going to be able to orient to all the experience we're eating every moment. So if you understand paradigms as the digestive enzymes of the way we process reality, you can understand better why paradigms are inescapable and necessary. And that's where we can lift off here.
But even digesting, if you pardon the redundancy there, digesting that idea of that our paradigms are how we're digesting reality causes... a person to take that in would have to accept that they're distorting reality, that they're not experiencing reality purely as it is. That's something, that's a premise you have to accept before you can accept that paradigmatic assertion,
Yeah,
which is, I think,
that's
the primary thing. Like, people say, well, I see this and I observe that and I think that, and that's the way it is. Actually, no, there's a mechanism in there, like we talked about last time, where that goes 9 times, that goes from your general assumption about the cosmology and cosmogony of the universe that you may not even be aware of, that then flows all the way down to that's good or bad, and this is what I need to do about it.
Yes.
And
yes.
that takes a lot of self-awareness and a willingness to look for people to be able to do.
And that's not so plentiful in our troubled world right now.
And that's a function of consciousness, not intelligence. Exactly
right. CQ is different than IQ. We'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, here today. But what we just said, though, such a beautiful example. The converse or inverse, I always get those two. I'm a little dyslexic, so I can't remember. But it's also true that when non-dualists, enlightened non-dualists, claim they're beyond all paradigms, because what they say is paradigms are mentalized. They'd say that. And the mental body is where the I is falsely constructed. When you lose the I, you lose any paradigmatic distortions and see reality, experience reality most purely. And that's why, even though they've got eightfold path and 3 essence of existence, the 3, what did you call anatta? 4
noble truths. There's many
4
lists.
noble truths. That's a paradigm there. As soon as you have an assumption and a value system, but they say they're beyond it when they enlighten, and that would be true if the only I resided in the mental body. If you transcend the I in the mental body, you are beyond paradigms. But that's a very unsophisticated axial age religious or spiritual point of view, because there's a lot more going on in the mental body than just the I and the focus on the I. It's collating experience according to its prior experience. So no one ever lives in the present. They always live in the past, trying to create a new future, because everything that if you say, someone shows you a toy that looks like a yo-yo, you say, oh, is that a kind of a yo-yo? Instead of seeing that new toy completely with no framework around it, you see? So this gets, when we talk about non-duality and enlightenment, which is the next series soon coming, we'll talk more about this. But it's the same error. Either you have to be either hyper aware of that you have a paradigm, or on the other side of the universe, when I don't have a paradigm at all. Both those extremes are equivalently distortive.
So wait, I want to make sure I get this. You're saying that the soul level I still exists inside a paradigm, or operates with a paradigm
effortlessly. Because it's experience and everything's learning. And we learn, as we'll get to in a moment here, which kind of paradigmatic is pro-soul I, and which kind of paradigm is anti-soul I.
So in other words, like in non-dual traditions, they hold it that you can arrive at a non-conditioned I and then be that. And that's actually the goal.
Yes.
Right? And identity would say there's no such thing as a non-conditioned I. You can be meta to your conditioning, but that pure, true soul I is subject to conditioning, and that it's unavoidable.
Absolutely. Identity offers that we can, what really happens in enlightenment is that a person is reconditioned from slavery to dualism, reconditioned to a liberation from the slavery to dualism. Those are both very conditionally shaped spaces. One is smaller than the other. One is slavery. The other is liberation on the meta. But we can go meta conditioning, but we will always fall back to that meta conditioning. A meta conditioned moment will become a reconditioned moment, and now you have more consciousness oxygen after that happens. See,
so you're meta to your conditioning, but not devoid of it, as
It's
evidenced by, you have a preference, chocolate versus vanilla.
Sure.
And so the traditional enlightened person would say, well, that's just an arising preference in the moment. It actually has nothing to do with me, because I, on some essential level, don't prefer vanilla or chocolate. It's just in this moment, vanilla
Yes.
seems more appealing, but it's not me.
Yes.
And we would say, no, somewhere in there that's coming from you or related to you.
Yeah. That's exactly accurate. That's well said. But this is the world of conditions. Everything is conditionable, even consciousness. And I can completely personally attest, which would show up in Dayglow Orange for a non-dual enlightened person.
You'd be dismissed as
oh yes. So I just want to say that up front. I can personally attest that going meta to the slavery to dualism changed my life irrevocably. And just like they claim enlightenment changes your life irrevocably, but identity would offer that changes irrevocable change is a completely different consciousness bandwidths to it than what we've been offered by Far Eastern esotericism for so long.
Well, we've gone down the rabbit hole of we're being drawn into enlightenment stuff, and like Stacey says, that's going to be in a series coming soon. So that may be over some people's heads because we're assuming quite a lot of understanding of that. But some people who've had experience in those paradigms may be following it. I think we better make it talk about the paradigmatic buffet things in more broad terms if we're going to do justice by this, probably, right?
Sure. Well, it's actually segues very, very easily, because if you can't escape paradigms, now we're our faces put right in the forefront here of what we do with paradigms.
Oh, I want to say one more thing before we go there, and I see what you mean. Yeah, it is a really good segue. The way I always thought about it was, and what I've heard you teach before is, when someone enlightens, okay, they may be free of some mental body paradigmatic construct, but they used a paradigm to get to that place.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's another way in which they're inside a paradigm, because, if you look at a map to get you from A to B, and you use the map to get you to B, and you arrive at B and go, haha, I need no map anymore because I've arrived, the map is useless. Well, now it is, because you used the map to get there.
You wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the paradigmatic map. So you can't escape paradigm. Well, that's a great way to say that, Joseph, because just because you don't need the map after you get the destination doesn't mean the destination isn't 100% linked to the map that got you there.
And this is what frustrates me about, like, for example, Eckhart Tolle describes his awakening experience in the beginning of The Power of Now, I think. He was in this deep despair, depression, and he heard a voice, and then he was like, wait, who's that talking? And then he had this awakening experience. And now he teaches how to get people to that place. And he has no idea how he got to that place. It just happened to him.
So no causation. There's no causation in classical non-duality. There's no causation. It visits you unmindfully. I was taught when I was in my Zen phase by my Zen coach was enlightenment is an accident. You can't make it happen. You can just make yourself accident prone. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, is a paradigm. That's a feature of a paradigm right there. There's no escaping that. So, you don't sit on the couch and watch NASCAR and drink beer out of cans, but you don't, willfully meditate 15 hours a day either. You have to find something in between so that it can find you. But that's still a thing to do. Unless, of course, you're a fan of the Maharishi and you think that learning to levitate is you're on your way to enlightenment, the hopping thing, So there's another whole thing. So there's some pejorative right there, and it's discerning. I know many people, really good people, who got hoodwinked by the Maharishi. And where did all the money go when the thing collapsed? It was very interesting how that all happened. But 15-hour meditative marathons, all you do is teach people to stay at a certain plateau unless you drop koan bombs in that 15 hours now and then. So the point being here is that what do we do with paradigms, Joseph? They're inescapable. That we've made the argument for that. You don't have to believe it. This is just identity's point of view, and we don't hold identity as in any absolute truth. We're just waiting for it to be displaced by a deeper, more incisive paradigm.
Sure. Yeah.
That's all we hold it with. So what we want to talk about today is the buffet style New Ager, who most religionism is based on one paradigmism. Christianity has a paradigm governing its dogma. Islam, Judaism, Jainism, whatever. Most religionism, they all have a picture of what is the truth, and so most old-time religions from the axial age are based on one paradigmism, and that is offered to any person with a reasonable amount of IQ and even a minimum CQ, consciousness quotient, that there has been as much harm done by one paradigms in history as good has been done. It's not all been evil and dark, but sure. The Inquisitions and the genocides and the judgments from rabid religionists who hold their one paradigm is the only way to go. Most of the old religions and conditioning we have to get away from is religions that just say one paradigm. It doesn't really sell itself very well as a humane, a soul-based or God-based orientation. When you have a paradigmatic elements that say I'm going to paradise if I murder the infidel. I mean, this is not based in love. This is not based in divinity. It's all aberration. All aberration. So what's come to the modern day here is that a lot of people say, well, whatever the truth is, it's too big to fit into one paradigm. It's too big. I'm going to cherry pick or buffet style. I'm going to pick and choose what I believe, and I'll make my own paradigm. Well, we've got to take a step back here. There are two ways you buffet paradigms relate to it in a buffet style. A lot of religionists, which identity would call intra-paradigmatic buffeters, they pick and choose which elements in the paradigm that they believe in and which ones not.
Right. We talked a little bit about before about the incoherency of that. I like to say sometimes, like, we talked about, like, well, if you don't literally believe in the truth of Adam and Eve, then technically you're not a Catholic, because if you think like Ayn Rand would paradigmatically, the whole thing falls apart. I would say sometimes, like, that's like believing in chlorine but not boron. Like, you can't do that because the thinking is they're all inextricably tied. You can't accept hydrogen and not helium. The model identifies both of those things.
Great metaphor. Yeah. So if you don't actually believe the wine changes to Jesus's blood and the bread changes to Jesus's body, even though the chemistry shows they are identical before and after the abadabadu up on the altar, which I actually use this metaphor, and I had someone once raise up and say, but that's just like the dinosaur fossils. God put them there to test us, our faith. And that the chemistry didn't change. God reaches down and changed our chemicals stuff so that we would have to believe it. And so science couldn't prove it. I mean, talk about a paradigmatic attachment, you could say.
And there's a little sidebar about why I've heard you say so many times, and I had to learn this the hard way myself, why you won't debate paradigms.
Yeah. Because
anyone who really can think paradigmatically can see, like, all paradigms will make sense internally. They create these perfect circles. Descartes did it and Freud did it. They create a model. If it's decent at all, it will be able to explain a lot. And that's why there's no point in debating paradigms, because if the thing has any power at all, it could be used to, that's God testing us. Oh, okay, great.
Sure. Yeah, and this is why all paradigms are equal in one way if they are internally coherent.
Yeah.
If they've got to be internally coherent, there are many examples of one paradigms, Catholicism or Islam, the words of love from Muhammad about love and gentleness and obedience to Allah. I'm sorry, that just doesn't, that completely contradicts murder of the infidel. Mm-hmm. And so you to have any sort of respect, a paradigm has to be internally coherent. It can't contradict itself. And so this is what leads right into intra-paradigmatic pilfering, I call it. I'm a good Mohammedan. I don't buy into that radical stuff. But I'm still, I'm Islamic. I believe in Allah. But I don't buy into that. But again, as you say, there are interpretations of the Quran that could lead people to infer that if they have a certain filter in their consciousness, that justification of murder in the name of Allah. So the point being here is that either you can't call yourself a Catholic if you don't believe the wine is still wine after the priest blesses it and the bread is still bread. You can't be a Catholic. And yet Catholics do this all over the place. They won't admit it many times, but they just pick and choose which elements they like. Well, yeah, evil's got to come from somewhere, so it's got to be a Satan, right? Because humans just aren't that mean, right?
And even more common, I think, in is Judaism, the kind of Reform Judaism I grew up in. It's like, I don't know, I've read 40, 50, 60% of quote Jews don't actually believe in God even.
Yeah, right.
And that is, not only is the effect on the individual, but the effect on the children. Like, I remember being forced to go to Hebrew school and being quite angry about it because I could sense the lack of integrity. It was like these people, my parents and many of these people, they're not actually living this. And yet I'm supposed to go through these motions. It made me crazy.
Right. Well, and it comes to mind, Joseph, that reminds me of how Hasidic Judaism actually would agree with what we're talking about right now. You can't pick and choose.
Yeah.
Right. Williamsburg, the community in New York, in New York, Williamsburg, every element, every second of every day is adjudicated vis-a-vis the Torah. And this means women stay in the kitchen. The man is in charge of the house. Everything about everyday life is adjudicated by the Torah. You can't pick and choose. Well, I believe this and I don't believe that. So that's the other side of the coin of atheistic Judaists. But in this case, the one paradigm point of view that where you can't cherry pick the elements you like or don't like in itself is what's the word? Anachronistic, atavistic, and completely out. Isn't atavistic the same as anachronistic?
I don't know atavistic.
I think so. Okay. At any rate, that's easily all you have to do is use your tongue of taste when you're exploring a paradigm. Trust your tongue. It will tell you, what is wrong with this, where women are subjugated still and men run everything. And because women can't get to God to Jehovah except through the man, and the man's standing with God. Mm-hmm. So there's a case of sometimes the judgment or discernment of a paradigm is based on your consciousness tongue, not your consciousness brain. You sense it.
These organized religions will make these like small changes to kind of like get with the times. Like in Catholicism, women can be priests now, right?
No,
still not.
No, still not.
Wow, but Protestants they can.
Gotta have a lingam. Or it's no dice for you, sister.
Wow, that's amazing.
Best you can be a female deacon and assist the priest at Mass, but if you're in all the way as an employee of Vatican Inc., you are going to be a nun. That is about it. That's as far as you can go.
But I think of but the church has said some stuff about gay people in the last 10 years or something, where they're sort of like trying to widen the net to appeal to more people without running into a paradigmatic train wreck and contradicting themselves in the past. It's really, every time there's a new release, it's quite entertaining to see. How are they, I wish I could be in the meetings where they're like, okay, how are we going to present this? Well, we can't say that it's okay to be gay because that's too unpopular. And so they're presenting some message that reduces the rigor of their paradigm without showing inconsistency, trying to appeal to more people so that they can cherry pick in a way that's favorable to them. I mean, it's political. It's like a business.
You just remind me, brilliantly outlined there. That was really wonderful how you patched that together seamlessly. That was great, Joseph. Reminds me, though, of I think it was 2 popes ago, who blamed the pedophilia rampant in the Catholic universe. Blamed it on the 60s. This was a quote. He said the dour guy, the guy who never had a smile on his face. The
German guy, the Rinziger?
Before Francis and before that one, the 2 back. The profligality of sexual freedom in the 60s caused all this pedophilia.
So in other words, their paradigm is so weak that the Cultural Revolution at the time infiltrated the holiness of the church, and people were led astray.
That's a paradigm buster right there.
Exactly.
Right? But I'd like to remind that Pope, I think he's still alive. You're supposed to know the dogmatic historical narrative of the religion better than anyone in the whole church, right? So I would like, if I ever had a chance to talk to him, which I won't, I'd like to invite him to tell me why they built all those thousands of orphanages in the Middle Ages to house children because priests and nuns got together surreptitiously sexually and created babies. You know about these orphanages. They are notorious in the Catholic Church's narratives. Those happened way before the 60s.
Yeah, they predated the hippies by, 1,000 years or something.
I mean, again, there's sometimes I weep about this, sometimes I laugh about this. These are just obvious contradictions that you don't need a lot of IQs to get the ramifications of, right?
Well, then what's the alternative is they have to look at how the pedophilia is created by their own paradigm through the repression of sexuality. So they have to come up with something that externalizes the cause, excuses it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another whole topic right there. So what we're talking about here is pick and choose inside a paradigm is strategic and shows anyone who inside of one paradigm picks and chooses which elements they want or not to be not a real. They shouldn't call them. It's like Tibetan Buddhism should be called Hinduism because it's half Hindu and half Buddhistic. You can't call yourself Buddhism if you don't follow the teachings of the Buddha. You can't be a Catholic if you don't believe Catholic dogma. My father, personally, my experience with this is that he was a paradigmatic cherry picker because after 4 children and a very difficult income challenge, he didn't have a solid job as working in a factory or something. He was a salesman. After 4 kids, he could not afford another child. 2 were accidents and 2 were intended. So he started wearing some latex around his lingam and went and confessed that on Saturday night before Sunday's Mass, of course. And the priest told him that he was living in a state somewhere between a venial and a mortal sin. At that time, they called them that. Mm-hmm. And his penalty was, if he was going to continue using that, he could no longer receive the body of Christ. He couldn't go to communion anymore.
Wow.
So my father was, of course, dyed-in-the-wool Irish Catholic, and this devastated him. But he stayed being a Catholic, stayed using a latex on his lingam, and picked and chose to stay calling himself a Catholic, even though he was breaking the rules directly.
And continued to receive the cookies.
No,
he didn't do that.
He was way too integrous.
Oh,
the priest told him, the man in black said, "You cannot do this. Uh-huh. If you take communion, then for sure you're in mortal sin neighborhood." See, then you'll go to. If you die in mortal sin, you go to hell.
I see.
That was the teaching. So, no, he stopped going to communion. It broke his heart. A sweet man that he was, because he really drank the Kool-Aid of Catholicism, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a good example of right directly in my own home, where even at age 14 or so, 15, when this happened to me, what smells about this? What's wrong with this picture? Mm-hmm. So that pretty much takes care of identity's excoriation of paradigm buffeters inside of one paradigm.
Inside of one, okay, yes.
Yeah, inside of one. But there's another kind, interparadigmatic pilferers, which is in the modern day the default one nowadays, for those who are no longer identify as a Judaist, a Catholicist, any of the five religions, whatever. What they think is that the truth is so big, it can't fit into one paradigm. So we're just going to cherry pick elements from different paradigms and put my spiritual lifestyle, build my spiritual lifestyle based on that.
Empowered by the freedom of religion, we should add.
Absolutely. And here we'll have might take a prayer from Christianity, meditation from Buddhism, yoga from Hinduism.
And I want to add something here. We didn't say before about collectivism, how it's completely understandable how this was not possible when the species survival was still largely threatened, because having a homogeneous belief system is in a way to bring a community together. So in 400 AD or whatever, you didn't have a freedom of, you didn't even think about it. You grew up Catholic or whatever it was, and that's what you were. You would not question that, and that's what made you part of your clan, whether you were a Amazonian tribesman or in the sub-Saharan Africa or in Europe. You were what you were, and that was necessary for the species to survive, because there would be too much heterogeneity for people to get along. And now there were no melting pot societies in the past, and that's very much Renaissance, and forward. So now we have these melting pot societies where you can travel and go 9,000 miles in half a day, and people can be from everywhere, and that creates this heterogeneity, and that's what has enabled, and the communication, the internet and telephones and all that allows people to have different ideas.
Yeah, good point. Now we have the freedom to pick and choose from different paradigms without being called a heretic and executed. Is the net effect of what you just said.
Exactly. Right? That's what would happen to you, right? Right.
So these paradigmatic buffeters shop for paradigmatic elements like buying furniture at IKEA. They'll take prayer from Christianity. They'll take, like I said, meditation from Buddhism, yoga from Hinduism, and Xanax from their gym age psychoanalytic doctors. So, and if you think about it for a moment, that combination, prayer, meditation, yoga, and Xanax defines a very large percentage of the population in Southern California.
So, if you could put that into a bunch of drop-down fields and then search, show me all the people doing this, you'd get, probably 1 million people in the United States.
Right. And so this buffet style stuff is hot in New Age. We have the freedom for it, like you said, but the newer now age people just pride themselves like crazy on this, and what identity offers is, reasonable motive, but what identity would like to offer is going on off the radar screen of their consciousness is that each of those elements that they pick came off different trees. And those trees had different nutrient capacities, different seasons that they ripened their fruit with. And when you try to put a vegetable, a fruit, a piece of meat, and
put it in a blender.
And put it in a blender. It's not going to taste very good, and it's not going to be very nutritious because there's going to be outbalancings. In other words, the point is, every paradigmatic element, like prayer is based on the fact that you're a real soul, there's a real God, and you can have a relationship. Meditation says isn't a paradigm that says there is no God.
Well, that depends on the form of meditation, which is a whole other thing. Yeah, the true
we talk about vipassana. Is what I mean by that. Of course you're right. Which I would call a lot of what goes on out there non-vipassanic as contemplation, not meditation,
or not even. Adyashanti. Sometimes I've heard him call it it's concentration. If you're just focusing on your breath and it doesn't go any further than that, it's not even contemplation.
It's some sort of shun, Tion at the end, right? So that there are energies associated with each of those elements: prayer, meditation, yoga, and Xanax, that will create turbulence in the soul field of someone who does this kind of paradigmatic cherry picking, which is why, in this case example, why they need the Xanax, because mixing those three together is going to create a very dissonant element to their soul field, even though it all makes sense in their head, because they can decide whatever they want to decide. But when you cherry pick different elements of a paradigm, you create a turbulence in your soul field that is going to be dead-ending you at some limit. It may give you a little more experience of what Buddhism is about, and what for a Buddhist, what a Christianity is about. That's all fine for information, but you're going to pay a price. And I've seen this over and over and again in people's soul fields, this confusion and turbulence that gets them. One moment they'll say one thing and it contradicts something they said 2 seconds before. And it's a big mishmash.
That's a good description of it. Turbulence.
Turbulence. Yeah.
This is because it's a very tricky thing to capture with words, because I just starting to hear voices, it's like pulling out of the collective unconscious, like, well, what's the problem? We're taking the best from all the different places, and by using different paradigms, we can arrive at some greater truth because everything has truth in it, and we can pull those truths out sort of like an anthropologist and find the universalities in it. And it's very hard. You can't really put your finger on what that does to someone, but turbulence and confusion is what I experience in those people. Even though I don't think they consciously experience it themselves. No,
most of them don't. They'd have to become 2 or 3 more levels self-aware to start being able to track their own turbulence in that way.
Because they're in a strategy of shoring up. So wherever there's a limit, it's like they dead end, but they don't realize they dead end. And then they go, oh, okay, I'll take some Xanax. Oh, the Xanax has some side effects. Oh, well, I'll change my diet to offset that. Oh, the diet. Okay, well, I'll try this thing. I'll learn the Enneagram. I'll try this other form of meditation. And so there's a part of them that is always like one more thing, like trying to put it together like a jigsaw puzzle that never has all the pieces. But they can place one more somehow, but it never is complete.
Yeah, it's Frankensteinian.
Yeah.
Really. And that's an apt metaphor. And you get a walking kind of zombie thing while you think you're doing the best. So there's no argument about the motivation is reasonable, especially if they have a little more CQ to them. In Southern California, that's a little hard to find. But when they have more CQ, they might say, well, look at the havoc one paradigmism has done to the world, right? And this is completely reasonable. But identity steps in and says, wait 1 second, can't argue with that. But wait, it's a little more subtle than that. It's not the one paradigmism that causes all the havoc. It's the way they relate as absolute truth to the paradigm that causes one paradigmism to be so destructive. It's the absolute truth one that brings all the havoc, that has no liberality, they are not our clan. Each religion is a tribe, right? And so the born-again Christian politicos in the U.S., the enemy tribe is the Islam, and we're different tribes, and we must war on each other. This kind of element where we've lost sight of, it's not one paradigmism is not the problem. Absolute truth associated with the one paradigm is the problem.
Yeah, it's not in content, in fact, it's in context.
It's in context. And I've met New Age paradigm buffeters who hold theirs as absolute truth. This is what works for me. And so that's what I'm sticking with. They don't say until it doesn't work anymore, because by then they've got ego investment into their picture and it's non-negotiable. And so I've seen absolutists even be in paradigm pilferers, inter-paradigm pilferers can adjust to that.
This maybe is a good place. There's this scene in The Devil Wears Prada. Have you seen it?
Yes.
There's a scene in that movie that brings tears to my eyes in this really strange way, and it's when Anne Hathaway's character chuckles about the choice between these two different belts when I remember that scene. Yes, go ahead. And I wish I had it written down here, but I've watched it so many times, and Meryl Streep's character just tears her into pieces and says, "Look at you with this lumpy blue sweater that you're wearing. You think that you chose that, but what you don't realize is that sweater is cerulean, and that then 3 years ago this designer released this cerulean collection, and then these other people copied it, and then this happened, and then it trickled down in the department stores, and then into Target and Walmart or wherever you bought that thing, and so you think you made that choice." But I get chills even talking about this, but actually that color was chosen for you and you have no idea. And that's what I always think of when I think of paradigms. So like with the New Age spirituality, people say things like, just let it go or something. And I want to say, do you know the origin of that premise? Do you know what that's connected to? Do you know the picture of reality that's related to? Do you know that's a 2,500-year-old idea and what it actually meant then?
Right.
You're buying the Walmart version of that's been stepped on like bad Coke 10 times over. And then you're trying to live it, and it won't work because it's so divorced from A, the purity of what it meant to begin with, and B, all of the other paradigmatic premises that it was related to.
Yes.
It's like extracting, like we do so much in food, it's extracting one ingredient from a food and going, or like we do with pharmaceuticals, oh, this thing. Well, you've taken it out of the whole plant, and now it behaves in a completely different way.
Exactly. And here's you're speaking to the endemic of low CQ in our world. The lower the CQ, the more people are blind to exactly that kind of depth evolution of what they pick today as their truth, right?
Yeah.
And the first step of that is teaching them starting in grade school or high school what conditioning is. And that's just nowhere out there. If to say I don't have a paradigm, for example, is to say I don't have any. No one's conditioned me to anything, and so conditioning is such a default way of orienting consciousness that it's not. We have no meta about it. It just displays the low CQ of our world tragically, even though it's innocent. It's tragic. So let's sum this up. One paradigmism, pilferers contradict their own paradigm, doesn't stand up to sobriety index for identity. Inter-paradigmatic pilferers mix and match, and that creates turbulences and sometimes a lot of defensiveness about that, which means they're not secure in their choices. That's not the answer either, because of all the ways you just described that can't be mishmashed together in a blender. So what's this? That's cursing the darkness, right? Let's light a candle here. The solution is one paradigm, not several. One that you commit to whole heart and soul until you dead end in it. And a lot of times people don't know they've dead ended to it because the thought of leaving the one paradigm that they've dead ended, if they start to get the feeling about it, usually brings on a whole lot of rupture with family and friends and community because you're marching to the beat of a different drum, right? But the issue here is that one paradigmism. The problem with what we discussed is that you relate to it as absolute truth, as all the great religions are based on dogmas that are non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. Buddhism, the I doesn't exist except as an illusion. And no matter what dimension they teach it in, there is no negotiability to that. It is unevolvable.
Right.
And that's why these religions can't evolve. And when a religion like Baha'i comes along a bunch of decades ago, centuries ago, it attempts to be more egalitarian. But again, you're going to be like Unity Church in America is a classic paradigm pilferer. They take this from that and that from this and this from this, and they wind up being sort of empty and polite with each other. And it's I've spoken enough.
Yeah, we talked about the turbulence, but that's another aspect of it. It creates a kind of emptiness. Soullessness is a little bit of a strong word, but it's in
the right direction.
Yeah. It depletes because I think it weakens someone the same way it weakens you when you lie.
Exactly.
When you're living a disparate set of things, you're living a lie because it's the Frankenstein's monster is not going to have the strength of something that is whole and organic and true to itself.
Oh, great relink there. That was great how you circle back to that Frankenstein. That's exactly right.
And it's so tricky because the buffeting is a paradigm that is an evolution from the oppressive monoparadigmism.
Right. Monoparadigmism, yes.
I think you once said like monoparadigmism is a childlike form. Like, tell me what to do. I need this structure. That's a childlike orientation. The teenage orientation is I'm going to pick and choose because I'm free and individual in my power, and I get to do whatever. Yes.
I can be a rebel.
Right.
And that's multi-paradigmism as opposed to mono.
Which is more mature, but real maturity we're offering is living according to a paradigm and facing the dead end of it if and when it dead ends and insisting on having something to live by that's as whole as you are.
Oh, well said. We have to learn to be sequential monogamists with our paradigms. But an important point here is the only way one paradigmism works is if the members don't hold it as absolute truth, only something to test every day for its sobriety. No absolute truth allowed. As soon as you put an absolute truth anywhere, you just created a drunken, reeling person, just came out of a paradigmatic bar. So what you've got to do here is you've got to be monogamous with your paradigm, but test it all along every time. But that requires the CT thing, critical thinking. Yeah. It requires that you embrace a paradigm and have doubt about it. Mm-hmm. If you don't embrace it and equally or deeply and passionately, and then at the same level of passion and depth, question it every day against an evolving consciousness that is meant to evolve and not stagnate in all of us. So that's why it's difficult to offer this, light this candle, one paradigmism, stick with it, which is like you said earlier, I won't argue, I won't debate paradigms. I would say, well, but I'm a Baptist Christian, and here's why this works. And I would say, stick with it. Don't. Why are you listening to me? I'm a heretic, a heretic here. You don't have to listen to me. Stick with what you're with. Is it working for you? That's fine. But please let me talk about mine here. You've got yours. It's historically lots of words and lots of information about your paradigm, but very little about identity because I'm the only one writing about it. So the idea here is you've got to have critical thinking, and critical thinking and spirituality are not easy bedfellows, to use an old ancient term, bedfellow, right? Critical thinking tends to eschew religionism and spirituality of all kinds and turns people into agnostics or atheists. So if you're an atheist, don't listen for you probably stopped listening a while ago, although we do have some fun intellectual exercises in these podcasts you might enjoy. But stick with it until it doesn't work for you anymore. One thing about a sober paradigm is it does not seek membership. It doesn't seek followers, and it doesn't try to retain followers on either end of the spectrum. How many spiritual points of view do that? At least Buddhism doesn't recruit. Although in certain cases, there are enlightened gurus who want to retain their flock and have their way with them the way they want and penalize you. If you penalize when they leave, then you show that you wanted to retain them. And a lot of times that happens in certain cults that led by an enlightened person. Sure. So the idea here is identity is trying to live up to all of these definitions. I don't hold it with absolute truth. I test it every day. I'm always looking for a contradiction. But no matter what rabbit hole we go down in these podcasts that Joseph has so beautifully articulated, every rabbit hole we go down doesn't contradict this rabbit hole over here, no matter how deep we go. I've been testing it for 40 years, and other people have been testing it. Whereas I'm not maybe the smartest guy in the world, but my dedication to sobriety is rare for a paradigmatist, a paradigm giver. There's not that many real new paradigms out there. What they call paradigm shifts out there in the common world is really just reduxes of different, they're not really new. They're still holding premises and assumptions, but just articulating them in a different way, as you've said
how
before.
Alcoholics Anonymous is really a remix of Christianity, which is one of the more interesting ones.
Exactly. So
I want to insert something right here, though, because we talked a couple of times about testing paradigms, and I think it's really powerful to remind people, pretty sure we talked about this, how that's what you're already doing, consciously or not. We're all applied philosophers testing paradigms. It's just that most people don't realize they're doing it. And
or give themselves permission to do it, depending on their paradigm.
But it's like when it's unconsciously done, then the test is, I'm going to live my life, and then I attract suffering, because that suffering is almost always related to a paradigmatic, flawed assumption. But if you don't realize that that's the case, then you'll make up something. Well, shit happens, or, that person is bad or evil or whatever. I'm teaching a course right now, and I gave people, the subject came up, and I gave people the assignment to try to document translating the suffering they've been attracting in their life, try to translate that into what unconscious question are they asking that suffering has been an answer to.
Whoa, that is beautiful, Joseph.
And I wasn't sure if people would be able to do it, but I've seen some of the results, and they've been able to pull it off just with that frame, to look at the patterns of suffering in your life and ask yourself, what are you testing out that data is a response to? Like, what happens, for example, a really common one, what happens if I stay in a marriage where I don't really love the person? Or stay in, I'm a woman and I wear the pants in the family just because I can. or, these kinds of things, which are very common. What happens if I don't actually deal with my depression and I take medication to deal with it instead? Because the suffering is the experiential answer to questions that are difficult to admit we're asking.
Difficult to admit we're asking. Boy, that really brings forward to consciousness a really brilliant way to help people process their way to an answer.
Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of the very common one we talk about a lot in the past, that staying together in a marriage for the sake of the kids.
Oh boy, yeah, there's a paradigm, there's a question that they're living into.
Only teaches kids that love is not part of a marriage. I mean, that's the solution, to keep them, show them that, because they can sense mom and dad just hate each other on some level. Kids get this without any words; they feel it.
Yeah.
So exactly that example, we get so entrained, we don't ask this very provocative kind of question that you just articulated. What's the suffering? What's it's trying to solve? What's the issue there that's trying to solve it? That's a beautiful way to get them processable to what's really going on. That the outer configuration is just a symbol of. So that's really beautiful. Did that just come to you one day?
It was in the middle of the course. I don't remember how I got into it, but it was talking about I don't know. It just sort of showed up. It was not my plan at all to end up there. And I didn't know if it would work for people, because I didn't know if, how much prerequisite inner work has to be done for that to actually work. But some of the people were able to come up with some really compelling answers. It's just a reframe. What if my suffering is an answer to a question that I've been unconsciously asking? What would the question, sort of like Jeopardy.
Well, I get it.
Here's the answer. Yeah. What's the question you're asking that's an answer to?
Wow. Wow. Okay. So let's sum up. We're just about complete here, I think. One paradigmism held with absolute truth isn't the answer. Monoparadigmism. Multi-paradigmism is not the answer, because you pick and choose cherry pick elements that do not create soul resonance, only soul dissonance.
But it is often a necessary following step. Following monoparadigmism.
You've got to, in the meta, you've got to evolve from monoparadigmism with absolute truth to multi-paradigmism with relative truth. That's a step forward, but most people think that that's the final outcome. You've got to graduate to the third version, which is monoparadigmism, but without absolute truth, which includes, by inference, critical thinking applied to every moment that you're embracing that paradigm. So
it makes me think we're already seeing some of the limits of that sort of diversity training kind of paradigm of people getting fired for not calling the student the right pronoun, and where because the left has been the champion of everything has truth in it, and it's okay, well, that's great as the pendulum moves away from sort of the Catholic oppressive objectivistic rule of everything, and this is how it is. Now we've been moving further towards subjectivity, and now we're beginning to see the mess that it creates.
Good point.
Where there's a kind of spinelessness and confusion, and what the NCAA swimmer, what's her name, Leah Thomas.
Oh yes, right. Mm-hmm.
There's an example of okay, yes, you get to identify as whatever gender you want. And after a year of hormone therapy, you get to win an event, even though you went through male puberty. And these kinds of things are happening where it's whoa, wait a minute. That's a kind of multi-paradigmatic idea.
Yes. A good point. Really good example. I'll give another one, a personal one of mine. When I was younger and stupider, I actually worked in a special needs high school for a little while, and helping emotionally challenged kids who've had some minor, scrapes with the law, some drug offenses. They couldn't fit in to normal high school milieus. And so there was this private school, very expensive, that catered to kids that never fit in. A good share of them, it was back in the 80s. And so going into the 90s, and it wasn't really clear to the world about autism and the spectrum that autistic tendencies lie in. I would say half the kids there were some on the Asperger syndrome spectrum somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, talk about paradigmism. The paradigm that governed that school, I really resonated with it. It was we don't try to solve the kids' problems. We try to get them to feel what they feel and see what comes out of that. I was astounded. That was the mission. They didn't do a good job of actually doing that every day. They had to do a lot of enforcing of boundaries and things because these kids didn't have boundaries. But
it would require an enormous amount of maturity to actually be able to embody that.
Yeah, I was attracted to it and then saw firsthand how they were failing at it.
Yeah.
But at one point, I was so frustrated with what I couldn't do. I had my own caseload with the students, and I also taught math and poetry at the same time.
I didn't know that part of the story. You were teaching math.
Yeah, I taught math and poetry, right? I thought that was fun. But the point is here is one kid who my heart went out to, was suffering so much, and nobody could connect with this kid. So he could connect with me. And he asked, I said, well, there is something, but it has to be between you and me. Here's a past life of yours that has contributed almost 85-90% to what you're describing as your suffering. Mm-hmm. Maybe sit with that and we can talk about it a little more. And I saw the top of this kid's head blow off and his heart open in one moment, just with the read was less than 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, maybe I guess what happens next. He went and told everybody else, and all of a sudden I had 10 kids surrounding me wanting past life reads. And so I said, wait, this isn't kosher, but the kids' hearts were so hungry. Mm-hmm. I did a few. I did just one time I did a few. And then it only took about a day and a half, got called into the office and says, you just, paraphrasing, you just abrogated the paradigm of the school with that element, and we have to let you go. Everybody loves you, but we got to let you go. So I got fired that day.
It's weird that they wouldn't have at least given you just a warning, because it didn't cause anything negative. So,
from their point of view, how it was articulated to me, I have trouble with memories from 30 years ago. Yeah. But what I remember is that it undermines the local focus on their problems that they have to learn to manage. And if you give them that kind of information, it floats them off their grounded focus. And I couldn't argue with that, except I said occasionally there might be an and between those two, that one doesn't negate the other, it could help the focus. Well, it fell on deaf ears. And so there's a good case personally of paradigmatic. I disrupted the paradigm and I paid for it. It was time for me to go anyway, but there's still a student there that I did this with that, we're still talking all these years later.
I once saw on Facebook or somewhere a pie chart that titled "What Philosophers Do at Parties," and there were two tiny little wedges for eating and drinking, and then the other 98% was challenging people's value systems.
Oh God, beautiful.
Because this is not unique to you and I. Anybody who studied philosophy in any deep way, you just can't help but see it in people, and people don't like it. And that segues us right to our conclusion here, that in the end, real change only happens when we change our value systems. You can't be a cutter and recover if you're supported in being a cutter and not invited to go why you're cutting, for example. So you've got to change your value away from the value of the cutting or the heroin or the polyamory or whatever it is that we're addicted to doing. You've got to detox from the value system that allowed you to live with that addiction. It's not about stopping the addiction
That'll automatically happen if you learn how to detox from the paradigm that told you the addiction was the solution.
Yeah.
That's a really important point. And that's a value system change. So you might be able to change your life by thinking differently and reading The Secret. Just you'll manifest it if you just think about it and will it long enough. You might be shuffling your elements of your life around on the same board, and that might play board, and that may feel refreshing and gives new oxygen to your life, but it all stays on the same board. Evolution of consciousness requires us to change our value systems. And that line, changing our value systems, draws a line, a very scary line, between psychology, which doesn't challenge value systems, giving the client the ability to change their own world. They don't try to change it. And cultism. What's not trying to change value systems in people to help them grow, and what's cultism? There's something in the middle, and that's what identity tries to navigate, is non-cultic slavery to absolutism. At the same time, we question every value a person holds if they want to evolve. CQ only changes in changing our value systems. IQ can increase if you stay on the same, if you just keep studying different domains. But evolution of consciousness won't happen unless our value system is challenged.
And related to what we were saying before, one of the things I sometimes see is there's not a week that goes by where I don't get frustrated and heartfully outraged about this, is that people are unconsciously typically asking the question, how do I get different results without having to change myself or my values? And that's the unconscious question. There's this a priori, well, I'm obviously fine as I am, and my values are obviously fine as they are. So how do I get a different outcome here? And the answer is you don't.
You don't.
Because that very frame is a strategy to make sure nothing changes. That's why people think that way, because there's a larger unconscious part that is asking the question, how do I pull the string so that nothing actually changes here? And keep the self that isn't working and keep the value system that isn't coherent exactly the same while having good intentions and seeming to be trying hard to make things better. And that's the state of our world.
That's beautifully descriptive of the dead-endedness, right? It's like what you said earlier. If they want to change something but don't change me, they're suffering. Why are they suffering? Because of a value system that they're holding on to that is unsober in some way. Mm-hmm. So to think that we could ever evolve consciousness without changing our value systems, to put it deeply metaphysical, it's just nuts. It's nuts.
You can dig a hole without a shovel. You can with your bare hands, and that will do something, and that's part of the seduction of it. Is you'll get a little bit further, and it's sort of like I think of in meditation sometimes, where about the idea of meditation clearing your thoughts. You can clear your mind. You can have no thoughts for 5 seconds or maybe even a minute, and then the mind's like, well, if I just try a little harder, maybe it'll be 2 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes. No, it's not about clearing your mind. It never was.
Never was.
So, but when people are mildly successful with staying the same values and getting some change to happen, they think, oh, well, if I just will a little harder, maybe it will work. But it actually is dead ending.
Oh, and you know what? That dead endedness, well said, so well said. It's based on the fact that we're willing to settle for crumbs.
Yeah.
Not a full meal of consciousness. Yeah. Oh, look! Oh, that worked a little. Oh, okay. I got a bit of bread. This mentality all stems from coming from lack.
Yeah.
Not from fullness. Yeah. To embrace, I want fullness requires a different value system.
Yeah, I think of this very often as like, in business, a sales cycle is how at the beginning of when the person becomes a lead to when the sale closes. That's the sales cycle. And big purchases can be, years, and small purchases can be seconds. And I think of like, I want to ask people, what is their sales cycle expectation for change, for fulfillment? Like, do they think that the fulfillment they're looking for, like someone who begins meditation, do you have an unconscious idea that enlightenment takes 30 years? Mm-hmm. And how does that influence how you go about it if your expectation is 2 years of really hard work?
Right.
And that's what I see in people, like they have this unconscious set of like, yeah, well, if I just keep at it, I'm like, well, when do you think, what is your picture of when you're going to have the mate of your dreams, the relationship of your dreams, the job that you love? And if you really turn the screw on them, like they'll reveal they have a picture of like 10, 15, 20 years when it's often very possible in like 5 or less.
5 or less, yes.
And that's that fulfillment, healthy greed factor. I don't know what we call it.
Nice. Very well said. So this leads us to the last point. We're done for this podcast is what I just said about finding the midline between not disturbing our value system and cultism. We'll talk in the next podcast about cultism and what Identity's definition of cultism is, where it comes from, and my own experience of catching the disease of guru-itis and creating a cultic kind of dynamic with people that I work with for almost 10 years and sometimes longer. And so we're going to talk about that in my own experience and offer up what I got out of that and why I actually may have some antibodies to that because of what I had to go through upon the collapse of my teaching authority. So we're going to talk about that in the next podcast, and that'll bridge the gap, bridge the issue of cultism also.
And fortunately, I'll be there too, so I can talk about the follower of the cultic dynamic side of things to round that picture out, because I learned a lot from that experience as well. So
and that's the key to learn. What does that wonderful writer say? Fail again, fail better.
Fail better. Yeah.
We fail. That's like saying dead ending. Mm-hmm. Keep failing. Even Warren Buffett espouses some element of this younger soul that he is. Fail better, or fail again, fail better. Eventually, it wakes you up, your failures, and you have nowhere else to look except in the mirror for why you started with some unconscious assumption and wound up with a collapse. It's like the law of karma is not repay in kind. For Identity, the law of karma is as you unconsciously sow, so shall you consciously reap.
Yeah, that's that question and answer thing.
Absolutely. So that's how we'll frame what I unconsciously sowed, that I wound up consciously reaping and did something about it. So it's important to, if you've got interested in what we've been talking about, Joseph and I want to do some self-revealing here. It'll be much more personal next time about my own journey and how it got me to this place where we can actually have this kind of conversation.
Yeah, so, I look forward to it.
All right.
Thank you, Stace, and thank you, listeners, for listening. And hope you'll join us next time.
You bet. Thanks again, Joseph.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Identity, please visit identity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.